What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Adidas Solematch Control 2, and I gotta say, by the looks of them, from what I'm seeing, my hopes are pretty high, so let's see if they live up to them. Let's get into it. And thanks to Adidas for getting me a pair of these to check out. However, as always, this video is not sponsored, and all opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. Now, the biggest reason I have such high hopes for the Solematch Control 2 is because, at least in hand, they remind me a lot of the Adidas Sole Court Boost. And those of you that have been around for a while know that, especially as a foot doctor, the Sole Court Boost has been one of my all-time favorite shoes, especially to recommend to patients with more snake bites on their foot, lumps, bumps, and bruises. And since that shoe, Adidas has really gone more toward the minimalist category of tennis shoes over the last few years and kind of abandoned the real rugged, protective performance line of shoes like the Sole Court Boost or the Solematch Bounce. And so if these can even get into the realm of the Sole Court Boost, I think I'd be thrilled, just because that silhouette of shoe, that style of shoe is such an easy shoe to recommend. It would give me one more shoe that's readily available in my arsenal to recommend to people. Already, I'm noticing, just warming up serve here, that they definitely feel a little bit like the Sole Court Boost, but unlike the Sole Court Boost, these are actually, at least they feel on foot, a ton lighter. When we go cut them open, we'll check out the weight and everything, but right now, whereas the Sole Court Boost sometimes, when you be going up to serve over and over again, they wouldn't feel like clunkers, but they definitely didn't feel like they were helping you either. Whereas in these ones, they definitely feel a lot more unencumbering, a lot easier to pop up off the ground. All right, so while we're getting all the balls, I just shove it all over the fence. Honestly, the performance of these is kind of a little play test here. Actually, I have more questions than answers, and I think we'll get a lot of those answers once I cut them open, do a lot more tests on them. But for right now, these definitely play, like I said, a little bit more quick, a little bit more, agile than the Sole Court Boost. And honestly, I feel just as supported in the midfoot on these as I did on the Sole Court Boost. The only trade-off would be, like I said, that lateral flange and that ultimate feeling of stability on the Sole Court Boost, where if you rolled your ankle in the Sole Court Boost, and you had a whole host of other issues going on versus just the shoe. So aside from that, it's the same pretty much stability and really nice, feeling under the heel of not necessarily that you're going to be squishing all the way through them like a squishmallow, but that they're supportive enough, that you can go the long haul in these. And unlike the Sole Court Boost, if you're in a long 3-set or 5-set match or something like that, really hot day, these aren't going to be weighing your feet down after a while. So I think it might be time to cut these things open and see what else we can find out about them. All right, let's get into the uppers though. The Solematch Control 2, on the medial side, you get a huge drag guard, all this like pileated TPU that goes all around the toe cap, and it gets really thick here, and that is met with outsole rubber, which, is outstanding. Now let's see what this thing does on the breathability test. Let me turn this thing on. Mainly out of the tongue, you actually start to see some fog get out of the forefoot there. This is gonna be interesting. Seriously? Anyway, so as you can see, it actually did take a while for fog to start coming out of the forefoot, but it did start. Now, the interesting thing about that is if you look at this thing also on the breathability test, these things, they only heated up 121.8 degrees, which isn't terrible. It's much less than I thought was gonna happen on these. And honestly, I think the reason for that is, number one, the tongue on these is pretty thick. We'll cut this thing open and check it out. Because if you look at it on the microscope here, there is just some textile threads, but it's a lot of TPU chain linking through there. So it's actually a little bit lighter of an upper than you think it's going to be. And I think that also contributes to, a little bit more how lightweight this shoe does feel on foot compared to some of its predecessors and more of the maximalist category. And speaking of that maximalism, if you look here in the lace line, number one, you've got reinforcement here on the lateral foot that does give just a little bit more feeling of stability to where that flange is. And then it's integrated, goes all the way up here into the proximal aspect where it is reinforced again. You get a lot more of that TPU drag guard up here, and you get the option for a high runner's knot or a real mega runner's knot in the back. Either one actually does stop heel slippage quite a bit. I found that if you weren't using a runner's knot, the heel slippage was moderate. If you were using the runner's knot, it was mild at best. So to me, I'd either use just a standard runner's knot in the back, or you can skip the high eyelet and do like a mega runner's knot and really grab a lot of that upper. If you look at this thing on the upper durability test, the Burr 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, I mean, look right there. I mean, there is barely any damage to this thing whatsoever. It really just scuffs it up, to be honest. So in terms of dragging or sliding, even more proximally on the shoe, right? Because it's got all the drag guard here around the lace line, even more proximal, this thing, one of the better ones out there. You know, it is thick TPU up here, but because it's real segmented, right, a little more pileated, that means you're actually going to get a little bit more feel, a little bit more grab on the court. So if you're coming to a stop and you're really everted like this, it'll actually want to grab in, maybe give you a little bit of push off from those really compromised positions. Last thing about the uppers I'll say is, I'll tell you what, trying to get through the heel counter on these things was a little bit more, you know, chunky than I thought it was going to be, a little tougher to get in there. Now there is double thickness padding all the way through this heel counter. This thing is incredibly stable. So in terms of micro motion in the heel, stability in the heel, they've got it in spades as well. All right, but getting into the midsole teardown, Solematch Control 2. Let's take a look what's underneath of here. Now it is here we go. This is a 3/4 length Boost midsole. I'll show it to you in just a second once I actually cut the whole thing open. I was wondering, because on the bounce height test on these things, the rear foot got 35 centimeters, the forefoot only got 28, and that looks like that's because this looks like bounce foam, right? And it's just a pretty, you know, just dull EVA foam. And then the rear foot, it's kind of that typical Boost foam. These are huge vacuoles, though. You can even see this just on the camera with the naked eye. So it doesn't say it's light Boost or jet Boost. This does appear to be just a traditional Boost foam. Now, the shank on these things is interesting. It is more of a torsion system because it does go, a very small portion goes under the medial side. And then on the lateral side, you get a little bit of a bigger torsion system. But and also, I should say, you look at just the bottom of it, the naked eye, it is broken in the middle. So it is not the craziest shank. So, I mean, a shank score on these things, 0.1, because there's a presence of a shank. It really doesn't cross any zones. The thing that I liked about these, though, is just the geometry of the midsole with the Boost coming down here. You still get it in the midfoot, which is really important for arch support because Boost is just such a durable foam. So as you get in the forefoot, yeah, I mean, we'll get to this in the fit section. That's not going to be the greatest thing on planet Earth for some people, but at least in the rear foot and in the arch, you are getting that super resilient Boost foam like back in the Solecourt Boost. One other thing I wanted to make mention of on the teardowns, if you look at the two layers of the uppers here, now that you can see them really well, you see the tongue is pretty decently padding, but it's not gusseted. It's just sewed down into the distal lace line. So not as much tongue control on these as maybe some others with a really high gusset, so you're not going to feel that crazy lock-in around the tongue, but locks down well enough otherwise. But if you look at the inside netting here, that meshing, it is really thick and padded, so it does feel pretty maximalist, but because there's so many different avenues for fog, for air to get out of there, for moisture to get out, that's why they didn't heat up as much as I thought they were going to, because even though they are pretty substantial, there are just so many egress points, like I said, for heat and moisture. So I did want to make mention of that even though it is more of a maximalist upper on the inside, it's padded a lot, there are still plenty of ways for moisture and hot air to get out of these things. And getting into the outsole tread, this was really quite something. Now, number one, it is pretty much a traditional flat, then chunkier herringbone, you know, going medial side on the forefoot, a little bit flatter, and then as well as on the, you know, lateral heel, and then chunkier on the opposite sides of the shoe. This is a near full length tread pattern. The shank kind of makes up the bald spot in the tread pattern, which is interesting. Look at it on the grip test ramp. This thing didn't slip till 43 degrees, and you can tell on court that these things have a ton of grip. I know when I'm just like kind of doing my little, you know, just traction test, just like, you know, just quick kind of just hearing it and whatever, these things were pushing my feet into the front of the shoe. I mean, thank God there was all that padding in the front of it, because when these things want to stop, they stop. These are not slide first shoes. Even though they are a little bit flatter of a herringbone on the medial side, this needs broken down quite a bit to start sliding a little bit easier. I had a couple shoes out on court that day, and the other one, they were sliding like crazy, no problem. Whereas in these ones, These are much more for pivoting power. These are much more, like I said, for sure-footedness. And because the tread is just so flat on the bottom, right, there's just not a lot of undulation to there. There's just a lot of surface area that is contacting the ground. I mean, the durometer on these comes in at 21.25. I mean, it's pretty high. On the outsole durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. I mean, you know, it just basically scuffs them up. So really, same durability you were getting, you know, in previous more rugged Adidas tennis shoe models. But because of the weight distribution of this shoe, like I said, it's not really all that much different in terms of weight from the Sole Court Boost. It just feels lighter because of the weight distribution, where where they put the most weight on the shoe. It just feels a lot lighter on foot. And that kind of bears out. You look at it on the speed ratio, only comes in at a 1.98, and then a shank score of 0.1 brings that up to a 2.08. And honestly, I kind of thought that was underselling these a little bit because, like I said, they felt so easy underfoot just to move back and forth. And I think that came from, number one, confidence, because they felt a little more maximalist, they felt a little bit more protective, but they were also a lot more of a nimble shoe. So I think if you're bringing the speed to the table, and if you're somebody with pretty quick footwork, needs a little more maximalism, a little bit more confidence, then I think these are a great pickup. Don't expect them to be rocket ships. I mean, you saw in the bounce height test too, they're not doing a ton, but they're definitely unencumbering enough, and you know, they get out of your way enough to still be a pretty speedy shoe on court, as long as you're kind of willing to bring the speed to the table. But getting into the fit of the Solematch Control 2, this is what really reminds me of the Sole Court Boost. These things only have a 9-degree in-flare. The toe box taper only comes in at 21 degrees. The toe box width is 10.5 centimeters. And then these things come in at a metatarsal width of 9.9 centimeters and then a length of 28.7. These things are just incredibly forgiving shoes from stem to stern. So a narrow, medium foot. Honestly, if you're really narrow, I'd consider going down a half size. Then you get the weight reduction on these. Then you get a little more of a performance fit on them. A medium foot, I think if you're short-toed, then I think you can go down a half size, like I said, to get that weight reduction. If you're a 2E, I'd go true to size. A 4E, I think you can go up 1/2 size on these, but if you can break them in true to size, you are going to get that weight reduction, which would be really nice. In terms of the snake-bitten foot, I mean, hallelujah. You know, heel pain, arch pain, these things are, once again, pretty darn good. In terms of ball of foot pain, they need an orthotic. Unless you really want the ground feel, because I could tell on these, they had some more of the feel that the Solematch Bounce had, you know, and so that was pretty cool. It's just that it'll bottom out. So I'd say if you can get even just a low profile orthotic in there, you don't need much in the rear foot and the midfoot. It's more for the forefoot, or you just want to put a little bit of padding in there, right, in the forefoot or something like that. They don't need all that much augmentation to really be elite for all categories. I would say in terms of ankle sprainers, I think the Barricade and these are probably the better ones out there. The reason I like these for sprainers right now is because, like I said, it's the geometry of the outsole. It's so flat, right? And because you get so much feel in the forefoot, not necessarily because it's got that giant clip on the outside that does not allow them to sprain. So no, they're definitely not the most protective against ankle sprains, I say, versus like the Tornio 2s or something like that, but they are pretty darn good. And like I said, they just use just more geometry to help you out with that versus bells and whistles on the shoe. But in terms of Adidas shoes and their lineup, like I said, this is night and day from what we've been seeing from them, and that is awesome in terms of, like I said, lumps, bumps, and bruises on your foot. And I think from the midfoot back, absolutely tremendous on their own. From the midfoot forward, like I said, even something low profile will really get you going. So the biggest question, are these better, worse, the same as the Sole Court Boost? Like I always say, they're just different. Honestly, they're alike enough that if you like the Sole Court Boost, I think these are worth a try for sure. I think there's going to be a lot of people that like these more because the arch support isn't as aggressive as the Sole Court Boost was. So you can kind of dial it in more, either with an orthotic or just some padding in the forefoot here or there. I think some people might actually like the more mellow feel of these. And like I said, they feel lighter on court than the Sole Court Boost did, even though they're not, you know, the scale doesn't lie, that they're not all that much different than the Sole Court Boost was. But where the materials are and where you distribute the weight, it can have a huge, huge difference. So, like I said, a little bit quicker of a shoe. not as maximalist feeling laterally, but certainly the geometry of them very, very nice. And kudos to Adidas for bringing back or reincarnating something that really the community wanted. So super happy to see these, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you have these on court. I think there's going to be a lot of people that have a lot of good feelings about these just because, you know, really bringing back something that a lot of people, like I said, really wanted. So if you do want to see a lot more tennis and pickleball shoe teardowns, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Down below, there's going to be a lot of these on this channel as well as on, you know, continued on the Foot Doctor Zach channel as well. So respect, rubber, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the sneakerverse.